Let me share my screen, which you hopefully can see. Okay, so my session will be a little bit different from what we've covered so far. What we'd like to do is just give a brief introduction into African textiles. One of the key things that we've been seeing from last year is this return to heritage. I think that, actually not I think, but last year was very destabilizing for many people, and a lot of people had to really recalibrate their relationship with work, their relationship with consumption, and even just recalibrate their relationship with what they're interested in. And heritage has always been a thing that has been recurring within apparel, within decorative home, and within accessories. But I think that we're seeing a return to heritage in a way that we haven't seen in a while, and I think that it's something that will be a kind of like key trend for a long time. Because the thing about heritage is that it's a much slower way of working. It's a much slower way of producing, and kindness to the environment is something that has been a talking point from the beginning of the pandemic. And so it's really no surprise that heritage becomes a key focus from last year going forward. So I'd like to start the session with a question, which is, which African textiles do you know? And so if you can, please write your responses in the chat. So you can name the textile, and if you know where it comes from, the country that it comes from, that would be great. And maybe Tara will share some of them with me further down. I don't know if, Tara, I don't know if anyone has written any yet.
Not yet. There's a little bit of time always.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll just go ahead. Whenever people think or hear African textiles, 95, I'm willing to bet about 95% of the time, people immediately think of wax print, which is what's pictured here. But one of the things that I've also realized is that not a lot of people know about the history of wax print and the ways in which wax print ended up in Africa. So some of you may know that that Ghana was a Dutch colony before becoming a British colony. And during that period, the Dutch were also colonizing Indonesia. And that wax print actually was supposed to be a replication of Java print from Indonesia. And so the Dutch saw an opportunity for trade, and what they did is take Indonesian Java, and the initial hope was to start to manufacture Java and sell it to the Indonesians. However, the wax print that the Dutch were manufacturing had these little cracks in it. And so the Indonesian market didn't quite like it because they felt like it was inferior and kind of like a poor replica. And so suddenly the Dutch had, all these cloths that they'd manufactured, and the primary market that they'd hoped would consume it weren't interested. And so then they looked to Ghana, and that's really how wax print entered the continent. Given the long history of wax print on the continent and the ways in which it's become localized, I think that it's important to kind of acknowledge and recognize the ways, some of the kind of problematic ways in which wax print ended up here. But then at the same time, it's important to also recognize the many ways in which wax print has really become a staple and localized in many parts of the continent. So countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Congo really have a long history of wax print in ways that other parts of the continent don't necessarily. And when you look at the history and the very early patterns of wax, the symbols and patterns that have meaning in Nigeria, Ghana, and Congo. But then now a lot of the patterns are a lot more general and abstract because obviously they're selling to a much, much wider market. So I just thought I'd give that brief introduction to wax print. I think one of my issues sometimes with wax print is that for many people, it has become, and it is the kind of like single signifier of what African textiles are. And that can't be farther from the truth. What we find is that across the continent, there's such a wealth and diversity of textiles, almost as diverse as the number of countries and the number of ethnicities that exist and reside across the continent. Last year, someone did this fabric map. And while I have some issues with this because it's in some ways, actually in a couple of ways, it's very incorrect. And some of the names that have been put are kind of like mislabeled. And some of the countries don't have all their textiles listed. So if you look at Nigeria, there's only Ashoke that's mentioned, but Nigeria has a lot more textiles than Ashoke. But I do think that this map is interesting because it really gives you a sense of all the textiles, some of the textiles that exist throughout the continent that perhaps not everyone knows of, right? So there's things like Shema, Alindi, Kitenge, Kikoi, Kuba, Samakaka, Shweshwe, Lamba, and there's many, many, many others. I also really love this quote by the Ghanaian artist Ella Natsui that says, "Cloth is to the African what monuments are to Westerners." And the reason that I love this quote is that it really situates the importance of textiles in African culture. You know, whenever if you go to Europe, you see images of Europe, monuments are a big, big part of how the cities are laid out, of public space. They commemorate, they celebrate, and that textiles historically across the continent have done the same thing. So when we talk about textiles, African textiles commemorating, I just wanted to share a couple of examples. And this is some textiles from Benin, from Congo, I believe. So on the left, we have a textile from Benin that celebrates the Queen Mother. And so that's a commemorative textile. We also have an independence textile. And I can't remember what country that was. I think I kind of just cropped out the country, which I shouldn't have. But yeah, that's an independence commemorative cloth from 1960. And then underneath, we have another commemorative cloth, also from, that was from Congo, because we have the President Mobutu on it. And so this gives you a sense of some of the ways in which historically textiles have been used, especially around commemoration. And so then you're able to link it directly to the quote that talks about monuments, that these textiles at this time and during these events really served as a sort of monument. So textile heritage. Tara, have we received any answers as to some of the textiles that people know?
I was putting it in the chat.
Okay. I didn't want to venture out into the chat.
Sorry.
I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, going to read. Kente from Ghana, wax cloth. Oh goodness, I'm going to butcher this. Adire from Nigeria,
Yes.
oddcloth from Mali. Seshwe, I can never say this word, don't judge me. Seshwe from thank you. From South Africa, we have Kente, a lot of Kente. Bogolan from Mali, Conga from East Africa. So, oh, you already said that. I'm going through a lot of mud cloth, a lot of South African, that material. Yeah, and oh, mohair from Angora, the Angora goat from South Africa.
Yeah, mohair from South Africa. Yeah,
I know that.
Amazing. Okay, so it's great to see that there's quite a number of people who know a couple of textiles, and that all the textiles that you've mentioned, I'll kind of touch on throughout my presentation. So textile heritage. I think it's important we just look at some of the many textiles that are available across the continent and the ways in which they're made. So Tara mentioned, or someone mentioned Bogolan. So the full name is Bogolan Fini. Some people also call it mudcloth. And Bogolan comes from Mali. And the reason that it's called mudcloth is because it's dyed using iron-rich river mud. So from a sustainability perspective, this is absolutely incredible because, you know, the cloth is dyed using mud, which is natural, biodegradable. And so there's really no chemicals involved in the process of making it. And so because of that, Bogolan is usually available in very earth tone colors. So shades of terracotta, some browns, sometimes you'll find black. And then you also find white. I'm sure that there's many of you who've seen this kind of like white and black pattern of mud cloth. And the way in which that's achieved is that the cloth itself is dyed black, and then the white patterning is actually kind of drawn on using a sort of chalk paste. So it's also all organic. And then we have Kuba cloth, also known as Bakuba, and that comes from Congo. There's actually two types of Kuba cloth, and I actually should have put the picture of the other type. But the type that we have pictured is the technique of making it is known as cut pile, in which the raffia fibers are kind of pulled in from the. So what you have is that you have a kind of like flat, plain mat or sheet, and then raffia is kind of strung through from the bottom. So it's actually very similar to how you make a carpet, right? So you have your base, and then you put in the fibers from the bottom, and then you start to shave. And what's really amazing is that when the Belgian explorers actually first went to Congo, and there's, I believe the letter or a kind of like excerpt from the letter is available online. When the Belgian explorers first went to Congo and found Kuba cloth, he wrote back home and said that he's found a material in Africa that's softer than velvet. And that just gives you a sense of the way that Kuba, and this particular Kuba, feels like. It's incredibly soft, and it gets even softer as it ages. There was something else about Kuba cloth that has now completely evaporated from my mind. But anyway, if I remember it, I'll come back. And then underneath we have Akwete. Akwete is Nigerian, and this is hand-woven cotton. It's woven well, now I believe it's mixed, but traditionally was woven predominantly by women. Then we have baule, which might be one of my favorite textiles, because it looks a little bit like ikat from Indonesia, but baule is a textile from Ivory Coast. It's hand-woven cotton and dyed using indigo. One of the things that you'll notice with a lot of textiles, particularly from Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Benin, Burkina Faso, is that the technique of weaving is it's referred to as strip woven cloth. So if you look at this image of the baule cloth, a little bit after the stripes, you see on this kind of orange strip, you see a bit of a zigzag line going all the way up, and that's because these pieces of cloth are actually made up of many narrow strips of cloth. So the size of the loom is actually the width of that first strip. And so you see that zigzag kind of repeats because that's where all the strips are being joined, meaning that the loom is maybe about that size. It's a handheld loom. And if you'd like, you can Google and you will see. And so kente is made in the same way, a kind of like similar size loom, and so is a shoke. Which means that you're really able to make the textile as wide as you want, because then you just attach as many or as few streets as you'd like. Yeah, so that's Baole from Ivory Coast. And then we have Ndop, which is actually a royal cloth. And Ndop is from Cameroon. The blue, as you can see, is indigo. And then the patterns are all just used, either sometimes painted on, or the areas in which that you don't want dyed are either stitched or somehow resisted, sometimes maybe even using wax. And that's how you achieve this kind of like blue and white patterning. So I talked about Ashoke and Kente. So we have Ashoke on the left-hand side, which is from Nigeria. Again, you can kind of start to see the strips. And here you don't get that very visible zigzag, because for some cloths, the visible joinery is actually a part of the design, whereas for other cloths, they like for it to appear a little bit seamless, so you wouldn't necessarily see the stitches. So you can see here with the Ashoke, what you can see, you can kind of see the seam, but you can't necessarily see the stitches. And so you'll get a mix of fabrics where, you know, in some you can see the stitches, in some you can't. On the right-hand side, we have Kente from Ghana. The Kente cloth that's pictured is actually the Ashanti Kente. There's quite a number of different types of Kente. There's an ethnic group in Ghana known as, so we have the Ashanti, of course, and then there's also the Ewe, and the Ewe have their own types of Kente, which are very different, as particularly in color, than the Ewe Kente. I don't think I attached a picture, I should have, but you can have a look and you'll see some of the differences. And then we have Adire that someone mentioned. Adire is also from Nigeria, and this is an indigo dyed cloth. Again, similarly to the Ndop, is that some of the ways in which the dye resist is achieved is using wax. So similar to, you might know batik. So that method and that technique of wax resist is also used in Adire, which is that you apply wax on the areas that you don't want the dye to penetrate, and then you dye all the cloth. Then once that's done, then you rinse out the wax. And that's very similar to the way that batik is done. And then we have bark cloth from Uganda. And bark cloth is really incredible because it's literally as it sounds. It's a textile that's made from tree bark. And so I attached the image at the bottom of the bark being harvested. And so the bark comes from a particular kind of tree. I forget the name of the tree, but it's found predominantly in Uganda. So they strip the bark, obviously without harming the tree. And then they just kind of like pound the bark for hours and hours and hours until it becomes this really soft and malleable textile. And it's used for clothing, it's used for bags, it's used for making books, it's used for making packaging. It's really, really incredible. And then we have Kikoi, which is from Kenya, and this is hand-woven cotton. The origin of Kikoi is I suppose in some ways similar to the ways in which wax print ended up on the continent. So Kikoi is actually based off of, or rather inspired by, an Omani men's wrap. So for those of you who don't know, is that Kikoi comes from a part in Kenya, the coastal part of Kenya. So Mombasa, Lamu, the entire coastal area, and the Swahili coast at large. And that stretches up from Somalia, which is just above us, all the way down to the Comoros Islands. And the Swahili had and actually even Swahili culture is a kind of mixture of several cultures. So it has some Arabic influences, it has some Portuguese influences. And so there was a time when within the Swahili coast, we had the presence of the Yemens and the Omanis. And so that really explains the ways in which this Omani wrap influenced the kikoi. It's really changed over the years because earlier on, the kikoi was usually worn by men to the mosque on Fridays. But then because the Kenyan coast is such a tourist destination, the cloth has really evolved and become this cloth that's actually made and marketed to tourists. Then we have the shuka, which again is kind of inspired or takes cues from Scottish tartan. And the story is that in the, I believe it might have been the 20s, some Scottish missionaries interacted with the Maasai and gave them all of these textiles that were all Scottish tartan. And that really became the base and the origin story for the Maasai shuka as we know it. Then we have the kanga, which is a printed cloth found in Kenya and Tanzania, also cotton. Kanga is very characteristic because the way that it's set up is it's a rectangular piece of cloth. It has a border going all around, and then it has a design in the center, and then a saying, also known as msemo, right at the bottom. So that's the text that you see right there at the bottom of the kanga. And I think what's really beautiful about the kanga is that it also shows the ways in which textiles have been used in communities as a very subversive way to communicate. And so, you know, if you wanted to pass a message to your neighbor or your friend or your in-laws, you know, you would buy a kanga that has a bit of a sassy saying, and that's what you'd wear to the market. That's what you'd wear when you're visiting them. And so for that reason, I think I've always found kangas really, really fascinating because they serve as this kind of like non-verbal communication. And many of them are really, really funny. There's obviously some that are very religious. But yeah, when you delve into the world of kangas, it's quite fascinating. And then we have the Basotho blanket from Lesotho, and that's wool, quite warm because there's areas of Lesotho that get really, really cold. So it's completely understandable. Okay, any questions till there? Please just put them in the chat, and then Tara, if you need me to go back to anything or explain anything further, please feel free. I think we're doing well time-wise, so
yes,
yeah.
I've been putting them in the chat, but basically a good question that came up, I'm just going to back to it because it comes up a lot. There's a lot of history behind the African print wax. My question is why hasn't it found its way into the mainstream high street stores? Why has it not done so well?
I think one of the challenges with the ways in which the rest of the world view wax print in particular is that they view wax print as a trend, right? And if you look at it, many brands have used wax print at one point of their existence. I think, when was it, 2-3 years ago, H&M had some wax print, but then because for them, they see it as something for a season, they see it as a trend. That's exactly how they approach it. So, you know, they'll have it, and usually it'll always be for summer. So they'll do a collection and they'll have it in stores between June up until, actually probably earlier than June. So maybe from about April up until July, and then that's it. And because for them it's a trend, they wouldn't do it next year, and they might not even do it the year after that. They'll skip it for several years and then revisit it. And so if you look at the number of people who've used wax print, there's many brands, from Dior to Burberry. Like, honestly, I'd be tempted to say that every single brand at some point in one collection or other has used wax print. But because they're approaching it as a trend, there is no real commitment. I think quite recently, it might have been 2 years ago, Dior, under the directorship of Maria Grazia Ciulli, did a whole collection with so much wax print. And all the wax was produced in a factory in Ivory Coast. They did some beautiful videos and imagery out in Ivory Coast. But then, you know, that collection went on sale and they haven't done anything with wax since. And it might be a long time till they do. And I think that that's how we start to see a real danger with the ways in which people see the whole of Africa as a trend, right? That Africa is a trend for X number of months, for X number of seasons, and then they move on to the next place. And that's really, really quite dangerous because it raises issues around sustainability. So like, for instance, if you look at that factory, which really benefited from that order, to get an order to produce textiles for Dior is a huge deal, right? And I'm sure it completely changed the factory in many, many ways. However, they produced that Dior collection and then Dior moved on. Then what, right? I'm sure the factory had to upgrade its capacity in many, many ways. And I think that sometimes these are the challenges that we see about factories working with big, big retailers for a season, is that if you get an order from a brand the size of Dior, if you had a workforce of 20 or 40, chances are that you would have to double or triple it to be able to fulfill that order. So you've gone from a capacity of, or a workforce of 50 or 60 to a workforce of 200. But then once you complete that order, what happens to all those other employees? What happens with all the other equipment that you've bought? And so I think it's really one of the things that people have really been pushing for is for the world to not see Africa as a trend anymore. Because we're a people, we're not a trend, we're not a thing that can only be interesting for a couple of months. I don't know if that makes sense, but we're not something that's interesting for a finite period. And I think that what's been happening now is that the world has really been recalibrating the ways in which it's interacting and viewing Africa, so that there is a longevity and a deeper commitment. I hope that answers your question.
Good answer. Sorry.
Okay, so designer interventions. One of the most beautiful things to see is the ways in which designers across the continent have been intervening on some of these textiles. So whether it's textiles from their own cultures or textiles from neighboring countries or from other parts of the continent, I think that these designer interventions are such a beautiful way to breathe new life into some of these textiles. Because maybe, for instance, you design bags and you want to use some of these textiles, but the ways in which the textiles are produced may not necessarily be sufficient for the ways in which you want to use them. Maybe they're too heavy, maybe they're too light. And so that's where designer interventions become really, really useful and really, really critical. I wanted to play this little video. Oh, I didn't even explain the image in the last slide. And so this is Kenneth Eze, a designer from Nigeria, who's really well known for the work that he does with Ashoke. In fact, the whole brand or a big part of the brand's appeal and reputation is really around the work that he's done with Ashoke, the Nigerian textile that we talked about earlier. So what Kenneth did is that, he obviously grew up interacting with Ashoke, but wanted to put his own spin on it. And so while he was in university, he kind of put his own spin on Ashoke. And so what he does is he uses Japanese silk, a really, really fine silk yarn, to produce Ashoke. And he also redesigned the loom on which his own Ashoke is woven. And so that's what we see in this next video. Tara, let me know if the video is playing and if you can hear. We somehow ended up leaving. Okay, that's very strange. I've lost my presentation.
Can you hit share screen?
No. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So that video really shows you, it shows you two things. One, it shows you the process in which Kenneth's Ashoke is being woven. And you also see one of the weavers wearing one of the scarves from Kenneth's collection, as well as the silk yarn that they're using to weave. And for those of you who may have seen Ashoke, one of the things that you're able to see immediately from the wrap that the weaver is wearing is that because of this change to silk, the textiles that Kenneth is producing for his brand have a really, really special luster that you get from silk that you don't quite get from cotton. And the drape of the Ashoke is also very different, which means that he's then able to make dresses, such as the image on the left, as well as coats. Burna Boy wore one of his coats to Coachella, I think 2 years ago. That gives you a good sense of some of the interventions that designers are doing. We also have Doreen Mashika, who is a designer from Zanzibar, who uses lesso in all her work. And because Tanzania is one of the countries that lessos and kangas are native to, it really makes sense that a designer from there would really take this textile and kind of build her whole brand around this kanga. And Doreen has been working with kanga, I would say, for about 7-8 years now. And every time she does a collection, she uses the same materials, but she's able to make the work always feel fresh and new and vibrant and interesting. And so whether it's kind of like clashing prints, clashing colors, sometimes in one dress she'll use up to 3 different kangas. It really gives her brand such a unique edge. Then we have a brand like Studio 189 from Ghana, who again use Ghanaian textiles, as well as textiles from other parts of the continent. This is the collection from last year where they used a lot of kente cloth. So the image on the right, that's a shirt and trouser set made out of kente. And then, sorry, the image on the left, we have kente. And then the image on the right, we have batik, which I talked about, which is dyed cloth using wax resist. So that's Studio 189. And then we have a brand like Emi Casbit from Nigeria, who works exclusively with Akwete. And so what he's done now is he's formed this really deep relationship with his weavers. And for every single collection, they'll come up with new patterns and styles of Akwete, which he'll use in his design. Emi is someone who's really been celebrated over the years for really reviving and investing in working with Akwete, because I would dare say that on an international stage, not that many designers were working with Akwete. Some of you may know the designer Makio, who's really well known, and Makio has always worked really, really extensively with Adire. And so Emi kind of introducing Akwete to the world stage has been something that he's received a lot of accolades for. Then we have Femi handbags, also from Nigeria. Femi is incredible because she works with Nigerian textiles, so whether Ashoke or Akwete, and she uses this to make really, really beautiful bags. So from day bags to evening bags. And it's amazing to see some of the ways in which textiles can be used outside of clothing. I think that sometimes when people hear about textiles or imagine textiles, they can really feel kind of like limited by the ways in which their imagination allows them to think that the textiles can be used. But I think that this is incredible because it shows you that textiles can also be used to make bags that are not totes, you know? Then we have Ayamisigo, who did a really beautiful collection 2 years ago using bark cloth, the cloth that I showed you from Uganda, made, I think, about 10 pieces in the collection from bark cloth. And this is just one example of a coat and a pair of trousers, really beautifully constructed, and worked for a really long time with the artisans to be able to get the kind of weight of bark cloth that she wanted. This is an interior home, an interior brand from Mali called, I'm not even going to attempt to say the full name in French, but it's AAA Co-op. It's a very, very long name, very, very French. But they do, so they use mud cloth, Bogolan, and they do these really, really beautiful textile totems. So they take the same technique of producing mud cloth or Bogolan. They've created their own patterns, but then they're also using the same kind of like strip cloths and making these beautiful textile totems that are used as wall decorations in homes. Then we have a designer from Ivory Coast, Loza Maliombo. Some of you may know Beyonce wore one of her outfits in Black is King, and that really changed things for Loza. But Loza has always been using Ivorian textiles in her work. So on the left, we see her using them to make shoes. And then on the right, we see her using baule, which we looked at earlier on, to make this really interesting pair of trousers that are linked with this really incredible brass mask that we also see on the shoes as buckles. Then we have the South African designer Tebe Magugu, who won the LVMH award 2 years ago. And this is a poncho that's inspired by the Basotho blanket that we looked at. So this is his own take on it. You see the kind of like very iconic blue and white, and he added this kind of like red detailing to it. That's really beautiful. So yeah, so that just gives you a brief overview on some of the interventions that designers have done on existing textiles, where they've taken or they've looked at a textile and kind of put their own spin on it. It's possible to use the textiles as is, but depending on how you want to use the textiles, as I said earlier, sometimes maybe the weight is too heavy. So like, for instance, this poncho that Tebe did, if you'd have used the Basotho, the actual Basotho blankets, they might have been too heavy to achieve what he wanted to do. So what he did was kind of really look at the blanket and distill elements from it that he felt were really iconic and things that he really wanted to reference, and created his own iteration of it that's lighter, that can then really make this poncho and have it sit exactly the way that he wants it to sit. But of course, there's also always the possibility of using the textiles exactly as they are. So, you know, when we look at this image on the right of Loza, that's Loza using the baule exactly as it usually comes out, exactly as it's produced, without really having to do any interventions within the production of the textile. But then the interventions that she introduces are in the ways in which it's cut, in the ways in which it's presented, and the assembly of it. I think that sometimes people can be a little bit uncertain about how to approach working with African textiles, how to find out about African textiles. For me, one of the most important things is research. And reason being, so the fabric on the left is called Lamba Mena, which comes from Madagascar. And when you look at it, it's a beautiful textile. It's mixed silk with cotton, and it's really, really beautiful. However, a Lamba Mena is actually a burial cloth. So there's a certain community in Madagascar when they're burying their dead, they wrap them in a lamba mena. So for someone who doesn't know, you may see the textile and be like, okay, this is a really beautiful textile. Maybe I can make a jacket. Maybe I can make some cushions. However, if you haven't done your research to find out that actually this is a textile that's used in funeral rites, you can make a terrible, terrible mistake that would be read as deeply, deeply offensive by the community that this textile belongs to, and even by your consumers, because, you know, I'm not particularly sure how many people would be comfortable wearing a jacket that's made from a fabric that's used to burying people, you know? And so that's why research is really important. Because African textiles have such a rich, deep history among the communities that they belong to, it's really important that in your research, you make sure that the textiles you're using, the ways that you want to use them, are respectful, and not offensive, although that's kind of like the same thing, you know, that you're respecting the community that the textiles come from, that you're respecting their customs, their traditions. If we look at something like Bogolan or mud cloth, right? Bogolan mud cloth come in very, very many different patterns, but then there's a number of patterns that are considered sacred, similarly to kente cloth and adinkra cloth. There are some of those symbols that are considered sacred. So then, for instance, you can't use them to make shoes. You can't use them to make cushions, because when you're making shoes, it means that, you know, someone is stepping on those symbols, and that's really something that's considered taboo. And that's really why research is important. And something that Tara said, and I think this is something that Aidan, Agatha, and Rob also said, is that give yourself time. Even when you're doing research, don't be in a rush to do the research, that you want to spend 30 minutes Googling and then just kind of like taking that information as your absolute and moving forward with it. Is that give the research time, you know. Yes, Google, but also try and see if you can find books, if you can find articles in magazines and newspapers that have been written about some of these textiles. If there's any museums you can go to that have, you know, textiles on display, or have an archive you can access, commit to doing deep research. So then that way you can be sure that in your work you'll be kind of showing that respect and care that's necessary. I know sourcing is something, so you've looked at all of these textiles and some of you are like, okay, this is great, but where can we get them? One of the things that's important to know is that a lot of these textiles are all artisan made, and many of these artisans might not necessarily be online. And so sourcing can be tricky in some instances. Of course, if you're sourcing in country, then it's a lot easier, but maybe not even a lot, maybe relatively, because I know that some of the ways in which these textiles and some of the areas that some of these textiles are produced, you'll find that some textiles come from the north, some textiles come from the south. And so there is a bit of effort that has to go into around sourcing. But I thought that I would share a couple of people that are easy to find, who are accessible. And so these are their Instagram handles. And actually what I could do is just hop over. I had a couple of them open. So this is Big Dread Kente. Tara, can you see?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is Big Dread Kente. They're based in Ghana, and they weave.
Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. No, I can't. Sorry.
Okay.
I lied to you.
Hold on.
And this is perfect because we're getting a lot of questions regarding sourcing.
Okay.
You're really answering a lot of questions. People are asking about where does, I almost said Ireland. Oh my gosh, sorry. Wow, I'm tired. I just started. So sorry. So professional. Apologies, everyone. Where does Africa sit when it comes to sustainable fibers? And you're showing us, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I'll answer that just shortly. Okay, so I hope you can see Big Dread Kente's Instagram. So this is Big Dread Kente. They're based in Ghana and they weave kente. They have all the information there in terms of like if you want to order, there's a number, you can DM them, and they also they show samples of what they're making. Like that's a really beautiful beautiful piece of kente. And they're also able to show some of the collaborations that they've done with designers and some of the ways that their kente is being used. So whether it's to make jackets or to make bags. Yeah, like that's a really beautiful jacket actually. And this is a great example of a collaboration. So some of you may know Stella Jean, who's a designer based in Milan, quite a big brand. So Big Dread Kente produced some kente cloth for them that they made this really beautiful pantsuit with. And then we have Cabes from Burkina Faso, who they make mud cloth. And again, you're able to see some of the textiles that they've made and the ways that they've been used. They had a really great year this year and last year. They made some textiles for Loewe, who some of you may know. They made this really beautiful sort of like parkas, as well as some bags. Yeah, and you can go and have a look at their Instagram. They have their email information there. And then we have Sabaha, who are based in Ethiopia. They make a lot of sort of Shema textiles, but are also able to do some custom work. Really beautiful textiles that can be used for home as well as fashion. And again, if you go through their Instagram, you're really able to see some of the products they've made for themselves, as well as some of the products that they've collaborated with other designers. So those are just a couple you can go and have a look at. The question of sustainability is interesting. One of the things that you find is that a lot of African textiles, okay, I don't know why I did that. A lot of African textiles are inherently sustainable. They use sustainable fibers, they used organic dyes. So if we go back and you look at bark cloth, right? To my knowledge, there aren't that many textiles in the world that are made from bark cloth. I think what we have is, we have a material like tinsel that's made from wood pulp. But then, you really have to get the tree and get the wood pulp to generate the tinsel. We have something like, there's another one whose name I'm completely forgetting. But what's interesting about bark cloth is that you're able to just take out the bark and you leave the tree intact, and the tree over a period of time will generate some more bark. But you've gotten this fiber without really having to harm anything or use any chemicals, or use 30,000-40,000 liters of water to produce. And that's what you find with a lot of these kind of like heritage African textiles. Similarly to Kuba cloth. Kuba cloth is made from raffia. Again, I don't really know. Actually, I'm pretty sure that there aren't any mainstream textiles that are made from raffia. So when you look at African textiles, you really see such a diverse exploration of alternative fibers. And that's why there is such an interest in African textiles, because they've always been made and continue to be made from things that aren't necessarily, it's not always cotton, it's not always silk. There's things like raffia, there's things like bark. Yeah.
And then we're seeing too, right, a lot of cool things happening in the sustainable space where we're seeing, people using like aquatic weeds and like agricultural waste. Right? And we're seeing people use like a lot of cool things are coming out of Nigeria where we'd have those weeds that would just clog up our waterways. Actually,
Oh yeah, hyacinth.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people now have turned them into, home products very similar, to the fiber of jute, right? And that's becoming more.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you're seeing more innovation from the continent than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as well as the Middle East too, but really you're seeing the continent as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that generally what's happening is that the global south, and this is obviously Africa, South America, and Asia, the global south is really being looked at in terms of sustainability, because what people are starting to see and acknowledge is that many of the global south practices and processes are inherently sustainable. Look at all the places that have like a rich and deep culture of basketry, whether it's using sisal, whether it's using jute, whether it's using seagrass, all of these materials are all organic, they're biodegradable. There's really no chemicals that are being used to produce or manufacture them. And so they're much, much better than the kind of like plastic baskets that we have to buy from the supermarket, or that are given to people at the stores. So even this large debate around plastic bags, some places don't necessarily have it because they've had alternative solutions for a long time. And what has happened is that industrialization has actually come to undercut some of these local and indigenous products, So like, for instance, in Kenya, you could have, and you still can get quite a large sisal or palm fiber shopping basket for $2-3. But because plastic bags came and they were selling plastic bags for like 10-20 cents, people were buying plastic bags because they were cheaper. But in the long run, we've now learned that these plastic bags have been far more harmful to the environment than these sisal and palm fiber bags that we've been used to. And for instance, in Kenya, because the government has banned plastic bags, we're now returning to these sisal and palm fiber bags that our parents were carrying. Yeah.
And an interesting question has come through, and we both know how to do this. We've been part of and watched beautiful things happen with collectives. I'm giving the answer before the question. Basically, considering that most of these African textiles are hand woven, how can they be available to meet the demands of bulk orders? I don't want to say the brand's name, but we know someone that did this, that meets bulk orders with working with collectives. Here, go ahead. I'm speaking for you. Sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really great about artisanal processes is that buyers also understand artisanal processes, right? So if a buyer sees your product and you've been able to communicate that, everything in our collection is handmade. So maybe it's ceramics, maybe it's some wooden products, and maybe it's textile. The buyer won't come and there's no way the buyer will come and tell you that I need 100,000 units and I need them in 3 weeks. And I think that that's also one of the beauties in which the ways buyers and retail understand artisanal product and processes. So a buyer may come and say, yes, I want 100,000 units. However, I want them delivered throughout the year, which means that quarterly you're delivering about 30,000 units, right? And so, and Tara can definitely speak to this, but you really see flexibility from buyers when they know that something is handmade, when something is artisanal, because they know that there isn't really a way to produce 100,000 units in a week because it's not a factory. You're working with people. These processes take time, and that's why there's also quite a large price difference from the things that are kind of like factory made and the things that are handmade. So, for instance, something like kente cloth. A large piece of kente, which would be what they call the men's size because it's the one that men wrap themselves in. That piece is anywhere from $100 to $150 just for the textile, right? Whereas the Kente print, because there are some factories that that do Kente print in Ghana as well as Chinese factories, Kente print is anywhere from $2 a meter, and you see the price difference, $150 and $2 a meter, and that tells you the difference. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, and you did, and that's the thing. It's knowing the buyer, right?
Yeah.
So we have been part of previously and different projects together where we've had, container loads being sent to buyers, but that they were aware of the process. We targeted the right buyers that knew that we couldn't do this overnight. So we've worked with Whole Foods on something. We've worked with the white company. So the white company, for instance, wanted a container load from one of our designers. Well, she had about 3,000 artisans in her community, but there was no way that container load could be made overnight. And the white company was aware of that. And how we did it was just like Sunny said, you're delivering in a different manner. You're delivering in almost like just in time. So they'd sell through it and they get more, sell through it and get more, which actually a lot of retailers prefer than having to hold on to all those goods. But you need to be able, that's part of understanding your supply chain. We had someone get an amazing, huge order. That was a container load, I think it was almost.
It was.
She went, wait a second here. Whoa, I'm going to go back now into these different communities that I know are doing this, help them form collectives that I can then order from, train those people. It's a lot of work to do it, but she was then able to fill that order and support this community and actually help that community really grow and keep a tradition moving. That would have been, kind of dying off a little bit as well too. Yeah. And like Sunny said, you're targeting the buyers that are interested in these products. And right now, I think you guys could hear from yesterday's session, there's a huge demand for this product. And it's you can do it, but it's controlling the supply chain and really partnering with your artisans and understanding their needs. I think a lot of times too, I don't know if you disagree with me, Sunny, but we kind of come at our artisans and expect them to really understand what's in our head. So we also need to be really with that. And we'll spend, in our in-country workshops, we'll spend a lot of time on how we work with our supply chains, because it is very important. But that was a long answer to your question. But yes, you can get big orders. It's changing your mindset. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your session.
No. And actually, I can show you an example of some platform or some platform that exist that kind of do that. But before I move on to that, I just wanted to share some further reading. So these are a couple of books that you can have a look at if you're interested in knowing more about African textiles, if you're interested in doing some more research. And yeah, I know that the slides will be available, so that'll be there. I wanted to show you Powered by the People. If I can find it. Yeah. So for instance, there's Tara, can you see?
No, and it's such a beautiful website. I'm waiting.
Oh God, that always happens when you kind of like change between windows. Okay, so now you can see. Great. So there's a really beautiful platform / website called Powered by People. And Powered by People, all the brands that they have are all artisanal. Everything is handmade. It's something that they communicate. And they're really great at communicating lead time. So for instance, they have this really beautiful pottery studio from Mexico called El Centro Ceramica. And yeah, when you place an order, they're very careful to really tell you about the timelines, how long it'll take, depending on the order that you place. So this is a great place to have a look at. Another example is Industry Africa, which is an e-commerce platform. And again, everything is artisanal, everything is handmade. And and they have a couple of things on the website which are made to order, right? So they have it listed, but when you go and buy it, it's made to order, and they really will communicate how long it'll take for you to get that item. And so those are just some of the ways that people handle this kind of like artisanal production and buyers and delivery. Right?
But it's interesting, right? This is an international trend.
Yeah.
It wouldn't just be for the, artisanal type and handcrafted products, right? Like we were seeing that, that was huge during COVID, where people are okay to wait, right? The pre-order. And we were just showing how Saks Fifth Avenue, here, this is I wouldn't say Saks Fifth Avenue would be considered handcrafted.
Yeah.
So the consumer is being, as much as I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, yes, they're demanding, but they're actually now learning to wait for these things, and they're being trained now by everyone kind of being in that same model. So, check out Industry Africa, by the way. Love that site, everyone. An amazing site.
That's great.
Okay, we have, I'm sorry, do you have more to say? And I was going to get to questions. But...
No, I was going to, we have, I think, like 3 or 4 minutes. I wanted to see if anyone had any questions.
Bulk order, hold on 1 second. Hey, Robin, yes, the sessions are going to be available later. Let me just see here. 1 second, so sorry. Oh, people were talking about, are you familiar by any chance with banana fiber?
Yeah, I am.
How often is it used in industry, and how durable is it?
So depending on how it's treated and what part of the plant you're using, there's various levels of durability. So I know that like one of the most widely accessible and used part is actually used in packaging, and I don't know if it's just a Kenyan thing, but I'm tempted to say not. But like in Kenya, we have a lot of banana fiber boxes, so they're used to produce packaging. And so like even Gladys uses some of her packaging is made from banana fiber. But then there are parts of the banana plant that can be used to generate an actual textile. And it's quite a heavy textile. It almost feels like almost like a heavy linen, but the way of producing that is completely different. I haven't seen a lot of it because it's something that requires training in terms of like how you harvest that part of the plant, and also how you treat it and how you weave it. So it is possible. I've seen some from Sao Tome. I've seen some from, someone did a very small brief pilot in Kenya. And I think there was also some from, was it Madagascar or Mauritius, one of those two. But yeah, it's possible, and the technology, or kind of like the know-how, the technique is available somewhere, but you have to find it and kind of like learn and teach your artisans. But it's possible, and it's a great textile.
Oh, that's really cool. And then, we didn't really talk about, and we have just like 1 minute here, but I think the innovation that has been happening as well, like, the silk farm that you're aware of, and just like that are happening. I think this is where we all really need to widen our network and pay attention, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I debated adding all of that, then I realized that perhaps that's not necessarily an introduction. So maybe at some point further down the line, we might have another session around innovation. But it's really been incredible to see what's happening across in the field of textile innovation across the continent. We're seeing a lot of interest around whether it's kind of like revisiting some of these old processes, where people are really hoping to tap into, whether it's indigenous knowledge or vernacular knowledge. Both of those terms mean pretty much the same thing. And kind of like tapping into those knowledge systems, either to generate like revised versions of old textiles, or using those same processes to make new textiles. And there's many designers who are doing that, and there's also many factories who are doing that. So a Nigerian designer like Nkwo is kind of like tapping into an old way of making. So the process of making ashoke, and is making her own textile known as the Kala cloth. And she's doing that, she's making that from secondhand denim. So that's just one example of many, many innovations that are happening. There's some people doing some really interesting stuff with mohair in South Africa. There's some people doing some interesting stuff with silk in Kenya, in Madagascar, in Mauritius. So yeah, there's a lot. That's a whole other day.
Okay, good. No, and I think now everyone's getting a taste of, I was saying that this is just, these 2 days are kind of like our intro kind of, and kind of what we're going to be talking about, where we're going to be going much deeper into what's happening. But I love the fact that, you know, we had a really good, honest conversation about, you know, a lot of the perceptions. And I think it'd be great to hear, you know, how the global community, you know, I think it's very important that we start recognizing the different regions and diversifying as a continent, correct?
Yeah.
That we're, yes, we're always looped in together as well, when we're so much more than one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think all of us have a responsibility, those of us that are sourcing from Africa or we're on the continent and sourcing, we need to be very careful with the history. I think that's amazing what you said. I've watched many people really, sadly, just make horrible mistakes. And I love the fact that now we are working hard as, you know, a group, and just really making sure we're telling the right narrative and stories about all these amazing different histories of the textiles in different regions, correct?
Yeah.
And it's important when we're meeting with buyers that, you know, part of our history is, you know, the heritage part, I think, like you said, is that key trend. And that's part of it, is showing the history of the region that you're using, or the fabrics that you're using. That's a selling tool as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So no, and it was just nice to talk fashion. Like, I've been talking all the boring stuff. You got to. It's not fair, guys. Sunny always gets the fun part. I get stuck with the numbers. Aiden gets to do photography. Agatha and Robbie get to be fun social media, and I'm stuck with the boring part. But
they get to show us nice Instagram pages to follow.
But in all seriousness, I took notes of all the questions. Think we got to everything, but then I know, apologies again, that I missed a whole hour of questions. Didn't know I needed to refresh. Lesson learned. And then Sunny will be announcing his schedule very soon of his dates of future webinars. And then for those that are in the SheTrades Accelerator Program, really going to be having in focus mentor programs with Sunny. We're going to be having in-country workshops in Senegal, South Africa, and Kenya with Sunny. And so we're really, really looking forward to those two as well. Really deep dives into sourcing and you know, regional items that we all need to know. So we're really lucky to have Sunny, and then you'll be gracing us with your presence on different webinars as well for the whole group of SheTrades Global Dubai. So I thank you very much, because I always learn whenever I speak to you, and I always enjoy your pictures. And your slides are always pretty. So everyone will be back. Oh, sorry, Sunny, do you have anything?
No, I was just going to say thank you very much.
And we'll be back in 1 hour, so 1:30 Paris time. So all of you enjoy, digest anything that you are thinking to as well. You know, feel free to post it on the wall. We'll go back and take a look. Any items that you're really trying, now that you've been thinking, you know, this morning and yesterday, please feel free to just post, and just, you know, questions that you have. All right, everyone, have a really great afternoon. And thank you so much, Sunny, again. Really, really, I really enjoyed that presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.